All right, welcome to the 2014 NFL Divisional Round. My name is David Fucillo. I am from Niners Nation. I'm here with James Dator from Cat Scratch Reader. How you doing, James?
Good. How are you doing today?
Well, we were going along smoothly with this, and then the fire alarm went off, but we are back for take two. So hopefully Sunday's game goes a little bit better for the 49ers.
Fingers. Well, no, not fingers crossed for that, but let's just hope there's no serious injuries. How about that?
I can live with that.
Okay.
I guess you mentioned injuries, and obviously it's still Wednesday. The plan is to do two of these, one today and then one again on Friday. How about we just kind of get a general idea of some injury news? The teams get back to the practice field officially today. I know they've been practicing before this, but today we get the practice participation reports for the first day, and that kind of starts to get us an idea of where things are. What are some of the injury storylines that 49ers fans are going to want to kind of keep an eye on this week?
The big one is obviously Steve Smith. He sprained his PCL Week 16 against the against the New Orleans Saints. Obviously was out for the rest of that game, missed Week 17, and the team said if Carolina were forced to play in the wild card round, he would have missed that game too. So obviously it was good getting a break because the offense hasn't been quite the same. Earlier this week, Smith said he was probably at about 60% to play. He did participate today. Haven't seen the participation report yet to see if he was full or limited, but we do know he was in full pads on the field today, which is excellent news for Panthers fans. He was joined by running back Jonathan Stewart, who was sidelined for much of the year, was put on the PUP list, finally came off, then immediately sprained his MCL, I think in his fourth game out. It looked like his season might be completely over. He suffered a partial tear, but miraculously he was also out practicing again today. So I don't know what level he was at, but two big potential offensive weapons that both could be playing on Sunday.
Getting Steve Smith back obviously would be just slightly helpful to Cam Newton. On the 49ers side, it's going to be interesting because obviously you guys, you had the bye, so barring, any practice injuries that, you wouldn't have heard of before, you really kind of know what to expect heading into this week. I mean, you don't know necessarily, okay, Steve Smith is or isn't going to play, but you know that he'll be on the injury report in some format. With the 49ers, the only player that the most notable player is going to be Carlos Rogers, their cornerback. He normally starts opposite Tremaine Brock, but he suffered a hamstring strain in Week 17 against the Cardinals. He did not practice at all last week and then did not play against the Green Bay Packers. They ended up actually starting Parrish Cox in his place. The 49ers had actually waived Parrish Cox a couple months ago to make room for Eric Wright, who they had signed and put on the NFI list to start the season. Then Wright was kind of playing as the dime back while, when everybody was healthy. He moved up to nickel when Terrell Brown went down. But then last Sunday, Parrish Cox got the start in his place, and Wright was dealing with some hamstring issues earlier in the week as well. He had suffered a hamstring strain on Thursday, but then again, he was able to play some special team snaps, but nobody really is sure what the deal is, with him at that point. Rogers is probably going to be on the practice report as limited at some point this week. I don't know if it'll be today, but that's going to be the interesting one because the 49ers actually did a really good job against Aaron Rodgers last week. They held him to under 200 yards, and he had some big throws, but for the most part, the secondary really did a good job. And I think with the Panthers, at least my own personal perception of it is, they're a tough team in the pass game, but I mean, with a guy like Cam Newton, you're more worried about the legs, generally speaking. He can make the passes, but kind of like Colin Kaepernick, it's that dual threat that really kind of scares you.
Yeah, I agree. And similar to, I think what makes this matchup so funny is how similar these teams are. I think the way I look at it is the San Francisco 49ers are, for all intents and purposes, the Carolina Panthers, but 2 years more advanced. They've just had a couple more years to round out some of their weaknesses. Harbaugh has worked out earlier what their problems were than I think Ron Rivera did on the other side. But just as important as Michael Crabtree's proved to be, obviously him coming back, at least from the outsider's perspective looking in, has completely changed the face of the 49ers offense. That same threat is there with Steve Smith. They're a completely different team without him there. And then everything has to get routed through the tight end, Greg Olsen, which isn't dissimilar to Vernon Davis in a lot of ways. So I think that's what's kind of funny about this matchup is you can look across and you can obviously find some small matchup differences here or there, or places that one team excels over the other, but they're so similarly constructed, it's going to be a pretty interesting game.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I know, every fan base has their fans that think that they're not getting respect and they're going to blow the other team out. And I've already seen it in the comments on both Niners and
Yeah.
Reader. I mean, really, and this happens every week. Everybody thinks the other team is getting all the respect and all that, and that's just the way it is. But no, you mentioned Michael Crabtree, and that really, I know, this is the storyline that's going to get beaten into the ground, but this is one time where, this isn't that Tebow storyline that really has no bearing on anything. The return of Michael Crabtree is huge, and for all intents and purposes, the return of Vernon Davis for this game, because again, Vernon Davis missed most of that game with a concussion. They lost Garrett Selleck, their third-string tight end, to a hamstring strain on a special teams play early in the game. That left them to one normal tight end in Vance McDonald, and losing Vernon Davis as a playmaker is a huge deal, but the bigger issue in losing Vernon Davis and Garrett Selleck is the 49ers run a lot of 22 formations. They use a lot of two tight ends. And so when you don't have two traditional tight ends anymore, they were having to go with Vance McDonald as their starting tight end and then Adam Snyder, who's a guard, as their second tight end on a lot of these plays. And they're not going to be passing to Adam Snyder. And so really, it seems like the Panthers were really able to adjust their coverages and really load up because they knew there wasn't that deep threat without Vernon Davis out there. There just wasn't a pass catching threat outside of Anquan Bolden. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I know this is something you're working on, and we'll get to a lot of this, but especially on Friday. But it's going to be interesting to see how Michael Crabtree impacts this game, especially given that a 10-9 defensive battle. I think it'll be close again. I don't know. I think it's going to be more high scoring on both sides. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. Because the one thing that 10-9 game had is it had a lot of pressure. It had a lot of sacks. It was a defensive slugfest for all intents and purposes. But we didn't see a whole lot of turnovers, which I think could change quite a bit. It's rare that you see a team. Carolina got 6 sacks in that game. It is something I'm going to be looking at later this week. But it's rare you see that much pressure and so few turnovers and resulting in such a low-scoring game. So definitely I think it's going to be very different on both sides now. The Panthers are taking they're taking more risks downfield on offense, particularly with Ted Ginn, but it's really tough to get a bearing on this team. If Steve Smith's not 100%, I don't know how they're going to be able to run a vertical offense, but it is going to be very much about the line play on both sides of the ball, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely have to agree on that. You're talking about two lines that, on both sides, really, I mean, offensive and defensive lines for both sides that are among the better in the NFL in a lot of what they do. And obviously the Panthers' defensive front seven is kind of ridiculous at times. Mm-hmm. But again, I think, I am perfectly content to think that the 49ers' defensive front seven is among the best as well. And so, I mean, I know I enjoyed seeing some of the high-scoring games earlier. I love the Chiefs-Colts game was wildly entertaining, but when it's my own team, I really kind of enjoy those defensive battles.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree with you. And we haven't really seen a true defensive battle in the playoffs so far at all. All of the games have been relatively high-scoring. I think the closest we probably came was was strangely enough the Saints Eagles game on Saturday was probably bizarrely the most stout defensive game. So I think this is a chance to really set the tone outside of seeing what Seattle does to New Orleans. But yeah, I'm completely with you. I think most Panthers fans would probably agree that we prefer to see the game get a little bit more dirty and get into a position where Cam's not having to throw to win, because in each of the Panthers' losses this season, they've come when they surrendered some points early and were in a position where they had to throw to get back in it, and that's not how this team wins. It's about controlling the clock and grinding it out, so that's going to be the key for Carolina.
I think for the 49ers, one of the keys is definitely going to be their red zone offense, because we saw it against the Packers, and that game they had opportunities to put that game away early, and they couldn't. The Packers obviously bounced back late, but in the first quarter, the 49ers had the ball, had a goal-to-go situation on their first two drives, and they had to settle for a field goal both times. And that's been kind of a running theme where statistically, the red zone offense is actually doing fairly well. It's I think it was like 10th or something like that in terms of some DVOA and that sort of thing. But it just I don't know. We saw, like I said, we saw it against the Packers. They just couldn't put it in the end zone late, I'm sorry, early, and so they were, they found themselves up 6-0 instead of 14-0 or 10-0, and suddenly a Packers touchdown turns into a 7-6 game, and the pressure's all on the 49ers. So that's something where they're definitely going to have to deal with that. So we'll see. That's something that I'll be watching. But we've been talking about the Michael Crabtrees, the Steve Smiths, Cam Newton, that kind of thing. But obviously there are a lot of under the radar players that we're going to be keeping an eye on, and we both wrote about that for our sites today. It's something that I think we know about our own team very well. I can tell you all about the 53 men on the roster, the 8 men on the practice squad, and everyone in between. But for when you're an opposing fan looking at a team, you just can't quite get that kind of detail. So I guess since this isn't quite a full-on preview, what are your thoughts on some of the players on the Panthers that the 49ers fans really are going to want to keep an eye on Sunday?
Well, one, strangely enough, is someone I think 49ers fans know well. It's wide receiver Ted Ginn, obviously kind of infamous in San Francisco and to a greater extent in Miami, where they selected him with a high draft pick, and obviously he didn't pan out there. But instead of being just primarily a special teams threat, which he's certainly been for Carolina this year, he's been a vital playmaker for Carolina. In the entire Ron Rivera era with Cam Newton, we've looked for just a guy who can run fly routes and be that deep threat, and it's something that the Panthers have lacked. They've tried to plug in several guys into that role unsuccessfully. Ginn's the first one who's really stuck, and it's often the threat of Ted Ginn more than the eventuality. That's not to take anything away from him. He still has 36 receptions for 556 yards this year, which is nothing to sneeze at, but often he's stuck in the slot. They try and get that matchup to freeze the safety, and then they work off that to be able to open up the pass to Greg Olsen and some of the more short passing patterns, which they weren't able to do in the past. It was too often teams would stack the box and basically bracket Steve Smith and know that there wasn't any other threats. So on the offensive side of the ball, it's Ted Ginn.
With Ginn, I guess, sorry to interrupt you, but as a 49ers fan, Ted Ginn strikes a special place in our heart. And, he was a fantastic return guy his first year. He kind of came back to earth a little bit after that, but his first year he was among the league leaders in punt return average and kick return average. But he just never, he wanted more of a role in the offense, and they just never seemed to really be able to get it. And part of that was it seemed at times like he had hands of stone. So I guess the question is, I mean, have there been drops? Are there frustrating moments like that?
Oh yeah. I mean, there are definitely frustrating moments, but they're not as bad as I think we thought, and that's where it comes down to when I said it. He's oftentimes more of a decoy than an actual threat, because he does only have 36 receptions on the season. This isn't a guy who they're going to 4, 5, 6 targets a game, but it seems to be that critical moment. He'll either have your arms in the air or your face in your hands. It goes one of two ways with Ginn, but particularly in recent weeks, he's come up with big-time receptions when the team really needed it. Those 3rd and longs, he split the seam, and when the teams have been overly cautious about covering Greg Olsen, who's kind of that bread-and-butter player in that 3rd and 8 to 3rd and 12 range, if the Panthers get pushed back a little, they've been finding Ginn, and he's been pretty reliable. So he's someone to really watch out for, even though the name itself kind of conjures images of disappointment. He's really come through this year.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to watch, to see Ted Ginn out there. I know he's still, like I said, he was with the team fairly recently, so there's a lot of relationships between the two sides. I'm sure we'll see them all shaking hands, but it'll be interesting. The 49ers, have been trying to replace, have been trying to find extra weapons on offense, and with Crabtree, Bolden, and Davis, you're kind of there, but on their side of the ball, one guy that I'm looking at least as a wide receiver, would be Quentin Patton. He really hasn't done a whole lot this year. He dealt with some injuries. Early on, he injured his finger on a pass from Colt McCoy in training camp, and then he suffered a fractured foot against the Rams early in the season. Came back, had a really solid game against, I believe it was the Cardinals. It's been a couple weeks now, but he's a guy that there's somebody on Niners Nation who's created the Quentin Patton bandwagon. And so, as you can tell, he's one of those guys that he had a couple big plays in training camp. He was a 4th-round pick this year, but he had a couple big plays in the preseason, and that got people on the bandwagon. I really don't. I'm not expecting a lot from him, but he's a guy that Colin Kaepernick has been willing to go to in some key situations. Against the Cardinals, he went to him once on a 3rd and 2. It was incomplete. Patton had the ball but dropped it. He then went back at him again later on I believe it was on a 1st down, but it was when the 49ers were driving with under 30 seconds to go. And he's shown confidence in him in the preseason. He said he's a guy that he knows can make plays. He has absolute confidence in him. And Kaepernick is a guy that needs confidence in his receivers. We've seen it where he's focused. Before Crabtree came back, he focused on Anquan Bolden quite a bit. And I think now, and Crabtree last year was that guy, and we're seeing it once again this year. We saw it last week with Crabtree being really the focus of Kaepernick. And so, if somebody's going to come out of nowhere in that wide receiver core, it's going to be Quentin Patton. He's number 11. You'll see him. He's got a gold grill he wears. He wears the eye blacks, but he wears them like this instead of like this. And I don't really know why. I don't judge. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm not expecting a lot from him, but he's a guy to keep an eye out on.
That's interesting. Going to the defensive side of the ball, one of the people that I wrote about was free safety Mike Mitchell, kind of another guy like Ted Ginn, taken early, one of those Al Davis track stars who was taken in the 2nd round and infamously in the 2009 draft. I think it was ESPN didn't have a video package ready for him. And nobody had a draftable grade on him, so they just kind of flashed his name up and moved on because they didn't know what to do. He's really found a home in Carolina, but the one guy that I think if you kind of talk to Panthers fans about who embodies this, not only this season, but kind of the Panthers as a whole, it's outside linebacker Thomas Davis. It's hard to get a good bead on what people outside of Carolina think of him, but Panthers fans couldn't be happier for him. This is a guy who had 3 concurrent ACL tears in the same knee. Just a tragic situation where the Panthers gave him a contract extension. He tore the ACL. They restructured it and made it for less money and kind of more of a good faith deal. He tore it again, then had it replaced with a cadaverous ACL. Came back on a incentive-laden contract, tore the thing again, and now he's come back and he's having a career year. He's over 100 tackles, 4 sacks, double digits in passes defended. And he's a guy where on this Panthers defense, when you kind of look at the laundry list of players who teams scheme against, obviously everyone knows about the Luke Kuechly's and the Star Latule's and Greg Hardy and Charles Johnson. But when you go down that list, Thomas Davis kind of lags somewhere down around the bottom. And I think that's both in fan perception and how teams scheme against the Panthers. And he finds ways to get open just because they're a bigger fish to fry, it seems like a lot of the time. And he's a guy who will be integral in covering Vernon Davis because he's a lot better in pass coverage than Luke Kuechly is. I'm going to look at that a little bit later this week. But for all the things that Kuechly does really well, he's not very good at covering linebackers. Covering tight ends. That's not really his skill set. So Davis is going to be integral and probably a guy a lot of 49ers fans haven't heard of a lot.
Wasn't he also, didn't Pro Football Focus name him to their 2nd team All-Pro?
Yeah, he's had an absolutely outstanding season. I think a lot of Panthers fans feel that he was a Pro Bowl snub. I certainly think he was deserving, but the problem with outside linebackers in the NFC this year is you can pick 10 guys who are deserving, and when guys like Levante David of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Buccaneers is getting snubbed. It's difficult to find another guy to fill that role, but Davis has been really good. So he's a player that I think a lot of football analysts appreciate more than he gets a lot of play nationally. Yeah, no,
I can see how that would be the case. I mean, the 49ers defense is obviously a little bit more high profile just because they've had a few years to really put this thing together. And they have some seriously high profile guys on it at this point. And, you talk about the difficulties with the linebacker position, and you're talking about a 49ers team that last year had 3 first-team All-Pro linebackers and 1 second-team All-Pro linebacker. This year they've got Navarro Bowman was first-team All-Pro. I believe Ahmad Brooks was second-team All-Pro. I don't think Patrick Willis actually made All-Pro. And Aldon Smith obviously did not make All-Pro after missing some time when he was in rehab. So you've got that deep unit. It's going to be interesting to see how the 49ers work some of their depth back there. Aldon Smith actually ended up playing about 15 fewer snaps than Ahmad Brooks against the Packers, but that was mostly due to cramps. And it's interesting because they were playing in that cold weather up there, and one thing that can happen in cold weather that you wouldn't always expect is dehydration. because you get so cold you don't realize, you don't think that you need to be drinking cold beverages or any beverages at that point. And so you end up getting cramps and dehydrated. And so they had Corey Lemonnier, who they drafted out of Auburn. He is a guy that showed some things in the preseason, showed some things early in the season, and when Aldon Smith was out at rehab, Lemonnier looked pretty solid. But he, again, you're not going to see a whole lot of Lemonnier out there just because, unless there's an injury, and obviously we're hoping there isn't. But one guy that, when I was writing about today, I wrote about the cornerback position, but if Carlos Rogers plays, I don't think he's really, counts as under the radar at this point. But one guy that you guys will want to keep an eye out on is, two guys are Tony Girard-Eddy and DeMarcus Dobbs. They're defensive linemen. Girard-Eddy, I think he's like number 67 or something like that, and DeMarcus Dobbs wears like number 80. He wears an 80-something because at one point the 49ers wanted to turn him into a tight end. So, and they didn't want to have him, reported as eligible. So, but those two guys, they're really of note to watch because the 49ers starting defensive ends are Justin Smith and Ray McDonald. They've been great. Justin Smith is all-world as far as 49ers fans are concerned. But what they've done this year especially is they've rotated in Girard-Eddy and DeMarcus Dobbs so that they can keep Justin Smith and Ray McDonald rested. Smith and McDonald over the last 2 years had played, I think they were top 5 in total snaps, and obviously part of that is due to the fact that they were playing these extended playoff runs. Last year, 49ers made it to the Super Bowl, but they did it with basically a one-arm Justin Smith because he had torn a triceps muscle. So this year, I think somebody did a count, and based on the number of snaps that they were able to sit out compared to last year, Justin Smith and Ray McDonald missed the equivalent of 2 full games worth of snaps. And so the reason for that is they've got a guy, Girard-Eddy, who was an undrafted free agent, DeMarcus Dobbs, who also was an undrafted free agent. I believe DeMarcus Dobbs was an undrafted free agent in 2011. Girard-Eddy was in 2012. And they've come out of nowhere to really establish themselves as very solid options. You'll see them a bit more in some base defense downs. They'll mix them in a little bit when they go to their nickel, but these are guys that are more just on that base when when they're facing the run. You'll see them on the ends, and they're solid. I think you'll see that especially with the Panthers team that runs a lot, you're going to see them come at them. You'll see they will attack those guys when they come on the field, but I would hope that they would be able to stand up to the pressure. But that Panthers run game is going to be an interesting one. I mean, they've built so much around it over the years.
Yeah, one player who, when we're kind of looking at the Panthers' run offense, that the teams haven't really had a good answer for, and honestly, I don't know how you scheme against him either, just because he's such a uniquely strange player to work against, is fullback Mike Tolbert. A lot of nicknames around these parts. He's either the bowling board, the Toldozer, you pick it. He's one of these guys that's so small. He's under 6 foot. He's over 240 pounds. He's just stout. And to see a guy like that playing a running back position, they stick him in on third down, and safeties in particular are learning the hard way that you can't tackle him one-on-one. So I'm really fascinated to see how that happens because they'll stick him in. They'll try and get some downfield blocking with the tight ends, and they'll just let Tolbert run it in. And it'll be interesting to see more defensive-minded teams stop Tolbert because he's been used a lot, particularly in the second half of the season, a lot more since these teams were met in Week 10, and that's going to be a fascinating matchup too.
Is he primarily a guy that they use for the run as opposed to the pass, or does he get passes in the flat, that kind of thing?
He does a little bit of both. What they've been using a lot of the time is when they get to these short yardage situations, that's when they'll start to use the option plays. And with Tolbert in the backfield who can pick up yards short, Cam Newton who can certainly pick up yards short, because I don't know if any quarterback in the league, hanging my homerism on a hook for a second, I can't think of a quarterback that's more difficult to stop on a quarterback sneak than Cam Newton just because of his size. So when you've got those two guys out there, yeah, look for Tolbert in those situations. They also really like to use him on second and 8, second and 7, where Ron particularly hasn't gone for a lot of yards on first down. They'll kind of throw him out in the flat and get him the ball in the open field. Once he gets a little bit ahead of steam, he's going to pick up at least 3 or 4 yards after contact, and that's how they've been using him a lot.
Well, it's interesting, we've talked about how these teams are so alike, and you mentioned Cam Newton being such a threat in the quarterback sneak. Obviously, you realize that Colin Kaepernick is kind of a big guy himself. and this has become a regular discussion now, is that the 49ers do not use him on quarterback sneaks. I don't remember the last time I saw him sneak the ball on, third and inches, second inches, or anything like that. And I just don't get it. I'm not really sure what's going on. They use him obviously with the read option. They run a lot of, they run their design runs, quarterback draws, that kind of thing. But you won't see him. You will not see him line up under center and sneak for that first down. And I mean, maybe they're concerned about injuries, I guess, but I don't really know. But you mentioned fullback Mike Tolbert, and same thing with the 49ers. Obviously, their offense has been built around a lot of work from the fullback. Bruce Miller was their primary fullback, but he suffered an injury, is out for the year. He suffered a fractured scapula on a hit. And so that's kind of another. I've done him as the under-the-radar guy the last couple weeks, and that kind of mixed it up with more some of the backup running backs in the article today. But this week, two guys to watch are going to be Anthony Dixon and Will Tukuafu. Will Tukuafu was a defensive lineman who the 49ers converted into a two-way player. He suffered an injury early in, I believe it was the end of training camp or week 1. He came to an injury settlement, left the team, was re-signed once Bruce Miller went down after week 16. And Anthony Dixon is normally a special teams guy. He's a running back. He's a little bit bigger. I think he's up more in the 220, 230, 240 range. He's a stockier running back. But they use them as fullbacks. Anthony Dixon is the guy that you'll see they're more inclined to dump off some passes to him, because before Miller went down, and before Crabtree came back, Miller was actually the third leading receiver on the team behind Anquan Bolden and Vernon Davis, because he was that guy that Cap would, he would dump it off to and just kind of really want to. He was that escape valve. And so Anthony Dixon has taken on that a little bit, not a whole lot. Will Tukuafu, on the other hand, is basically just, he's like I won't say he's a bigger version of Mike Tolbert, but he's a monster of a man. He's that guy that's just, he's a north-south guy. They're not going to give him the ball much, if at all. I don't think he's touched the ball yet since coming back, but he is, when he's lead blocking for Frank Gore, it can get messy.
Sounds like something to watch. Certainly be a test for Ryan Khalil in the middle, certainly.
Yeah, no, I would say so. So we'll see what happens. But at this point, I think we'll come back with more formal preview predictions, that kind of thing, on Friday. I've got Jim Harbaugh coming up, press conference in about 15 minutes. But I think this is a good way to get things started. We'll talk. We can talk more about injuries, that sort of thing. Anything else that 49ers fans should be paying attention to this week out of Panthers practice?
Nothing too much. The news around these parts are just Steve Smith getting healthy and Charlotte getting over the heel turn by Ric Flair. So we'll see if that progresses. If this whole, I think it was a publicity stunt, but we'll see how this whole publicity stunt plays out and whether there's anything else in the news. But nothing really other than the injury news, which we should have some more information on soon.
Cool. Yeah, pretty much the same thing in San Francisco. Our offensive coordinator is interviewing for other jobs right now, so that's always fun. Yeah.
Well, on that point, defensive coordinator Sean McDermott interviewed with the Washington Redskins, much to the chagrin of Panthers fans who kind of felt this is the first time we've been in the playoffs in 5 years. Stop using the bye week, but look, you can't deny a guy going and interviewing for a job. So we might be looking for a defensive coordinator next year. We'll see.
Well, then that's fair enough. Our offense, your defense. We don't need coordinators.
Exactly.
Alrighty, well, I will talk to you Friday. In the meantime, everybody check out Niners Nation and Catch Scratch Reader.
Thanks.